Hi, I'm Jeff Mielif. I'm a Principal Program Manager and Architect with the Microsoft 365 engineering team. And I'm here to kick off a series of videos related to mailbox protection with Microsoft 365. And specifically, I'll be talking right now about protecting email and calendar data end to end. This is intended to be kind of a high-level overview of the ways in which we protect mailbox data, both within Microsoft's infrastructure, how we manage things on the back end, as well as some of the features and functionality within our products that allow tenant administrators and end users to add additional levels of security control on top of what we provide at a basic level within the service. So as I mentioned, this is the start of a series of videos. The next 4 videos are kind of building on the topics that we'll be talking through here. With the next one being primarily focused on how we can potentially consider Exchange Online mailboxes as a secure vault. And in that session, we'll talk through some of the attributes of the infrastructure that Microsoft maintains internally to ensure that that the information that you're storing within your tenant, within your mailboxes, it is and continues to be as secure as possible. And in addition to being as secure as possible, is also highly available. So no matter when you need to get access to that data, it's available to you. From there, we'll move into a session where we look at protecting Outlook data with authentication and authorization controls, and that will focus primarily on functionality that exists within Azure Active Directory to help ensure that that only users who should be gaining access to mailbox data can. From there, we'll move on to protecting Outlook data on your devices and look at various policies that can be applied to devices within your organization to help further secure data and make sure that the data on those devices is managed appropriately in line with your company's policies. And last but not least, we'll do a session on protecting sensitive emails with policy-driven compliance and explain some of the policies that can be applied to mailbox content that result in additional levels of protection, whether that's encryption or policies around whether or not various pieces of information can leave the tenant boundary. We'll go into that level of detail in that last session. The URL that's on the screen will take you to all of the videos in this series, and we certainly hope that you'll stick around and go through all of them as you have time. So when we think about storing mailbox data, and specifically email and calendaring data within Microsoft 365, the primary product that's associated with that is Exchange Online. And Exchange is certainly not a new product for Microsoft. It's been around since Exchange Server 4.0, which was released in 1996. Certainly as an online service, Exchange Online specifically has been in place for quite a few years now. It is a highly secure product. We'll talk quite a bit through the remaining videos in the series around what we mean by a secure product. It comes with various uptime guarantees as part of our SLA. We have a very high level of compliance when we think about regulatory requirements and compliance requirements that exist for our customers around the world. And we provide a significant breadth of features that allow our customers to control the data that's contained within mailboxes. When we think about the reach of the service and the breadth of the infrastructure that we provide to deliver the service, it's really quite an amazing set of infrastructure. The snapshot that you see on the screen in terms of numbers will always be out of date because the service is always growing. That number of physical servers, is certainly growing on an ongoing basis, and we do continue to add data centers and presence in new countries around the world on an ongoing basis as well. This is a snapshot of some of the regulatory requirements and compliance controls that we implement within the service or that we meet within the service in order to ensure that our customers around the world are able to utilize our service in an effective way. And this, again, is also a point-in-time snapshot of a set of compliance standards that are growing on an ongoing basis as we discover the need to meet or exceed additional compliance standards around the world. Also wanted to briefly highlight the concept of zero trust architecture. This is a key component to the way Microsoft manages our own infrastructure, but also the way in which we enable our customers to manage their own infrastructure, such that you're better able to think about adopting cloud services in a very effective and efficient way. Zero trust architecture basically implies that rather than relying on the location of a user or the network that they're connected to in order to make assumptions around whether or not that inbound connection is trustworthy or not, that we trust nothing. There's zero trust to begin with, and we use all of the attributes of that incoming connection or that incoming request in order to make a decision. And those attributes could include things like identities, who the user is, the way in which they've asserted their identity, whether multi-factor authentication is being used, various attributes associated with that identity can come into play. We can also look at the device that they're using to make the request, whether or not it's a trusted device, a device that's managed by the organization, or a bring your own device type of scenario. And if it is a managed device, we can certainly get more granular in terms of the health of that device or the security of that device. We can look at the data that's being accessed, the application that's being used to access the data. We can look at where the user is connecting from and the trustworthiness of that network. And even the physical location that the user is attempting to connect from, based on some assumptions around the source address on the network. We can look at things like the policy that the organization has defined for how all of these attributes come into play, and we can use machine learning to understand the historical nature of requests coming into the organization, whether it's specific to the user who's trying to authenticate, or more broadly across the tenant, or even all tenants that are accessing resources in Microsoft's cloud services. All of that can be applied to making a decision in real time at the point in time that we need to handle that request, and make a much more granular assessment of whether or not that request should be granted. This is really kind of a core concept to how we think about securing Microsoft's online services, both internally within Microsoft. And again, as I said, how we'd like to see our customers take advantage of our products in order to secure their own tenancy in our cloud services. So having a good understanding of our zero trust architecture is very key to understanding how we secure our own infrastructure, as well as how you can secure your own mailboxes. We provide quite a bit of functionality for you to protect, restrict, and monitor identities. I just alluded to quite a bit of that, and we'll go into some more detail in the authentication and authorization session later on in the series. Additionally, as I mentioned, we do quite a bit of work within our own infrastructure to protect data, both in terms of users, or operators and engineers within Microsoft who have a need to access the back-end infrastructure on an ongoing basis to keep the service up to date. We have very strong access control and auditing and management of those access processes in order to ensure that the data is protected on an ongoing basis. Even including a lockbox system that can include customer approval in various scenarios if customer data needs to be accessed in order to resolve an issue. We have very strong protection for server data that is a layered type of protection when we think about the security that surrounds the physical data centers where we store and process data. As well as the way in which we maintain availability of that data with multiple copies of it spread out over multiple locations within a region. We'll talk through some of the additional ways in which we protect that data in the next session around encryption of data at rest and other attributes. And then we provide, again, some features and functionality for end users as well as tenant administrators to apply policy to specific pieces of information or the way in which information flows through the tenancy in order to further protect data at the application level. So let's look at what that actually looks like in practice from a productivity experience within our service. So when I jump over here to my demo PC, I'm going to go ahead and open up a web browser. And the first thing I'm going to do is connect to Exchange Online using the Outlook web app. So when I do that, the first thing that I'm presented with is an authentication prompt from Azure Active Directory. And I'm going to go ahead and enter my credentials. And one of the first things that you'll notice is multi-factor authentication comes into play. And if I jump over here to my mobile device, I've got an approval request from Azure Active Directory. I'm going to go ahead and approve that on my device. And once I do that, we'll see that I'm allowed to move forward within the authentication flow in the web browser. So authentication here is being handled by Modern Authentication. It's a term that we use within the service, and this is it's being provided by Azure Active Directory. It's a single consistent source of authentication across all applications in Microsoft 365. So the login experience is effectively the same regardless of whether you're logging in through a web browser, logging in through a desktop client like Outlook, logging in through a mobile device. You're effectively using the same back-end technology and process in order to gain authorization to access whatever the application is that you're attempting to access. Azure AD, like I mentioned, has the ability to understand who I am, where I'm connecting from, what application I'm using to connect, what I'm trying to access, what my normal usage patterns look like. All of this can be used to make a determination about whether or not to grant the request or not. And there's very minimal impact on the end user experience during login. Quite a bit happened there behind the scenes to make sure that we're protecting both the user's mailbox as well as the organization as a whole. Key to understand here that regardless of where I am in the world, all I really need is a browser in order to access my mailbox securely. My communication with the service, we can see based on this padlock icon up here, is protected by TLS back to the infrastructure within Microsoft's network, the service front door that's terminating my connection. So I can be assured that that my communication between the client and the server infrastructure on the edge of Microsoft's network is protected. Just in the same way that the mailbox data that I'm accessing and operating on from a productivity standpoint within the mailbox is also protected from a security standpoint and an availability standpoint. So, from a productivity perspective, I'm fully able to browse my mailbox, access my calendar, schedule meetings, and be fully productive within my organization just as a result of having a web browser and using that connectivity. So if I open up Outlook now, the desktop Outlook client, you'll see that I've jumped right into the client. I didn't actually receive an authentication prompt. That's because I've already logged in previously. I already have a token issued to me by Azure Active Directory that I can continue to use to access my mailbox. And that's been allowed based on the policy that's been set within my organization that I'm able to do that. I've got access to all the same information and all the same experience in terms of being able to browse my mailbox, send new messages, and interact with the data in my mailbox in my organization. So I'm going to go ahead and send a message here to Megan, and I'm going to ask for an update on a project that Megan's working on. I'm going to need an update on the schedule. I have an update for the release schedule for project Babka. So before we send this message to Megan and ask for that update, I'm going to point out that there's a section up here in the toolbar within Outlook around sensitivity labels. And sensitivity labels essentially allow you to categorize information, categorize the sensitivity of information or items in the mailbox such that policy can then be applied to those items. So as I change the sensitivity associated with this item, think of this as applying a label to the item that's going to follow it as it flows through the organization. And as a result of that label being applied, I can then automatically apply things like encryption or policy that prevents this item from leaving the boundaries of the tenancy. In other words, preventing this information from leaking outside the organization. So extremely powerful feature there, where the organization can define various labels and the policies that are associated with those. We'll go into quite a bit of detail about that in the last session in this series. I also want to point out that we have an online archive available. When we think about the online archive within Exchange Online, this was actually developed to help remove the need for PST files within organizations. Historically, on-premises Exchange deployments had very small mailbox sizes, and as a result, we saw PST files proliferate fairly broadly within organizations as users had a need to maintain information that no longer fit in their server-based mailboxes. And that's great for end users, being able to maintain that information in a way that they can search within Outlook and easily access, but not great for organizations that need to be concerned with protecting that information. Now with the online archive and additionally with large mailboxes, large primary mailboxes in Exchange Online, the need for having those PST files is dramatically reduced, and we can now protect that information in the same way that we protect just a normal mailbox within Exchange Online, using all of the features and attributes of the service that we're describing within this video series. So if I jump over to my mobile device now, I can go ahead and open Outlook here. You'll see that I have a very similar experience to what was shown in the web browser, as well as what was shown in the Outlook desktop client. So I still have access to be productive on data within my mailbox. I can send replies. Thanks for the info. Go ahead and send that off. But in the same way that I did previously, if I go and send a new message, I can jump in here and apply. Oops, wrong button. I can jump in here and apply sensitivity labels within the Outlook mobile client as well, and have that same level of power in order to apply relevant policy to information as it is maintained within my mailbox and also as it flows through the organization. So I'll go ahead and send another message to Megan. Again, this one is going to be labeled highly confidential. In my organization, that's going to result in it being encrypted, having some additional policy applied to it. Need to chat about your promotion. Stop by when you can. All right, so just with that sensitivity label being applied, I've got some fairly significant additional control being applied to this particular item as it flows through the organization. Quite a bit of additional protection to make sure that message is only going to be usable by the recipient and isn't going to go be leaked outside the organization. So again, quite a bit going on here within all of these applications, both behind the scenes within Microsoft's infrastructure as we maintain the security of that information, on disk and through the various layers of application infrastructure that Microsoft controls, but also within tenant administrator controls and end user facing features, which ensure that all this email and calendar data is stored, processed, and transmitted securely. So we'll go into, as I mentioned, quite a bit of detail on many of these features in future sessions. So with that, I will strongly encourage you to go take a look at the other videos. You can find them at the link on your screen. And I really appreciate you taking the time today to spend some time learning about mailbox protection with Microsoft 365.